We are pleased to have Bob Toal here today from Maryland, and he's going to be speaking on Livermore and Knight advertising cards. And this is something that I happily learned about many years ago. And I just jumped at the chance when I found out that this is one of his longtime specialties. And we're lucky to have him here today to tell us more about it. So, Bob, I'll turn it over to you, and we can't wait to see what you have to show us.
Oh, thank you, Hal. And thanks everyone for coming. I want to talk about the Livermore Night Company advertising cards. First thing to really say about it is that these are commercial cards meant to advertise a product for a customer. And the Livermore Night Company was a printing company. Basically, they did engraving. They were typesetters, they were lithographers, and they were makers of novelties. And the use of novelties in their advertising postcards was a marketing ploy to get customers to read the mail message. In other words, let the advertiser know that people were actually reading the ads. And I start out showing these two cards. One is the Yellow Kid card, and the other is a actually a special commemorative card. It is a first day issue of the Columbian stamp, 1893, January 1. And it was a card written by Livermore Knight as an advertising specimen. Only one of them is known, and it's uncertain if others are out there. This gives you an example of the type of early cards that Livermore Knight produced. They were in business for a number of years, from 1873 to 1971, but they did advertising cards from 1891 through 1918. And I was especially drawn to the earlier cards as I found them difficult to find and quite attractive. And here's an example of the cards that they did. And many of these have special opening on the side where you tear the sheet off. You can actually see where you can tear this tab off, and you open the card up and there's an advertisement inside. They even had die cut postcards, and this is an 1890 stamp. So they were a company that did quite a lot of business. In fact, one of the contracts that they had required two railroad boxcars full of calendars that they produced for an insurance company. So they were not a small organization. They had a 40,000 square foot building in Providence, Rhode Island. And they were there until 1956 when it was flooded out by the great hurricane up there. Then they moved to Pawtucket, Rhode Island, and were in business often, mostly straightforward through 1971. But after that, they became a holding company till 84, 85. This is a 1925 map that was published by Livermore Night Company showing pinpoint areas where customers utilizing their services were located. So one point may represent postcards, and other types of calendars or other printing that they did. And you can see how the bulk of their ads are situated in the central to northeast section of the country. But collectors of postcards, particularly in a smaller state and or different country, can still find cards used in advertising those products. So it all began with Frank Livermore, who was an engraver. Richard Knight was a lithographer, and Knight began in 1875 printing business cards and so forth. And he formed a partnership in 1883 with Frank Livermore, and they incorporated their business in 1892. As I said, they used to be in Rhode Island, and then they moved to Pawtucket. They had sales offices in New York, London, and Boston. And there are several Livermore Night cards with London or English type themes. So the president was Livermore, Frank Livermore from 1919, and then Knight through 1922. Uncertain if the influenza pandemic was the cause of their demise. Howard Knight's brother took over. He did a history in 25, and that history is online, by the way. Howard Knight, the son of Richard, took over, and then the grandson took over until it dissolved. And it really was, even though the company dissolved in 71 as an active company, they were a holding company until 85. And I think the purpose was to hit the 100-year mark for their organization. And then there was a Livermore Nights label company in the United Kingdom from 1998 to 2003, which had that name, but they were not related to the company. So here's a 1925 page out of Livermore Night Direct Mail Trailblazers. So their focus on advertising was to make it attractive to customers. And they did this across the board on everything they printed, but especially on these novelty cards. Here's an example of an advertising card printed for the Smith Premier #2 typewriter and the Smith Typewriter Company. So here's the card front, and the back of the card shows a 1-cent stamp canceled and a line drawing of a secretary at work, and it has a label pasted on it for mailing. Now, one thing about these cards is that they were printed matter cards. They were eligible for 1-cent mailings, and they did not have any writing on it. They just simply had typed writing. And they did not have the words postcard on the back. If you had a postcard, if you printed a card with postcard on the back, you had to follow certain size limitations, weight limitations, and script limitations. And if you didn't, you were charged 2-cent letter rate. In this particular card, if you read this typewriter on top, it says, "Dear sir, remove the platen and read the letter." So the platen's removed, and on the back is glued a letter, and you open the letter up, and sure enough, there's the advertising material. And they're touting the Smith Premier typewriter as the best typewriter made. So the Smith brothers made shotguns, and then they went into typewriters in 1886. And apparently, the use of the term premier was a winner and really made clients go after that. But this was an understroke typewriter. And basically, when you hit the key, the letter went up and hit the paper, but you couldn't see it. In order to see the typed letter or address or whatever you were typing, you had to lift up the platen, which has the rubber roll on it, to see the typed word. It also had uppercase keys and lowercase keys combined. And it was an old style typewriter going out of favor around 1908 when they had this mass advertising flea with Livermore Night. The front stroke typewriter really took off in 1896 and became the typewriter of choice for many people after that. So the point is, on some of these cards, there is not only the history of the card itself, there is a state related to it, and then there's also a story related to the image. And on that typewriter card, I've had several collectors want to buy it from me, but it's the only one I've ever come across. So they mailed direct mail novelties from 1891 to 1918. And a few in the early days had no numbers, particularly the very first one in 1891. The first numbered card was 1892, and that's this card down here. This one was the no number 1891. And the card numbers go up to as high as 1218, which is this card from 1918. The numbers went further than that, but wasn't on cards or mailable cards, but rather other items that they marketed. Here's an example of a petite calendar and stamp case combined, and it has a Livermore Night number on it. And another card, which is like a Hallmark card, it says fold the bill and stick the down cursor so you can see the portrait of the president, either Washington or Lincoln or whatever. And they came up with this idea in the early days, 1910 or 1912. Most of the time, the Livermore Night, actually all the time, the Livermore Night name is on the card. Sometimes they're not numbered. Here's an example, Livermore Night Company from Providence, Rhode Island. And then another one shows number 13, copyright 1892, Livermore Night, Providence, Rhode Island. So most cards which are numbered range from 13 to 1154 to as high as 1218. The dates are not sequential. You can have a Livermore Night card numbered 14 printed in 1892 and then have a number 15 in 1891. I mean, it varies. And I think what happened was they made card ideas and created a book that customers could look at. And probably they had these card ideas already pre-made, and the cards were numbered, but were not always picked to be used. So the other thing which is very cool about this is the same card can have different ads. You could have an ad from Massachusetts. You can have an ad from Georgia, from the same card in the front. You just have to open it up and look inside the ad. And like I say, most had patent applied for or copyright or all rights reserved. Another feature of these cards is that they had a art, black and white art on the stamp box on the reverse, which correlated with the picture side. This was allowed up until around 1904 when the post office said, we don't want any distractions around the stamp box to compete with the cancellation. So you can see an example of a 1903 card with George Washington and the cherry tree, this example here, whereas when they reprinted it a year later with the cherry tree on the left side, freeing up the stamp side. So around 1903, the stamp box designs shifted over to the other side, to the opposite side of the card on the back. That correlated with the front. In going on eBay or even on auction catalogs, the frustrating thing is the cards may be shown, but many people don't list their numbers. And some people don't even know if the Livermore Night cards or not. If it's just a fancy looking card, they'll sometimes say Livermore Night. For instance, just today, I went online looking for Livermore Night on eBay, and one person has an entry with 4 very nice looking cards. Only one is Livermore Night. One is by Henderson Litho, and the other is by Sheldon Press. But the tag calls them all Livermore Nights, and that's important because Livermore Night cards usually are more expensive than the other cards because they have a following and they have a provenance name. So there's a loyal following and they buy the cards and the card prices by supply and demand. Only a few people are going for the entire field that I know of. Some collect the cards from certain time periods. I first started collecting them pre-1898. And then I decided to just try to accumulate all that I could or try to, with the idea of perhaps making a list. Topical collectors like these cards too because of the theme that's on the front or the back. Sometimes it's on bicycles, telephones, the Columbian World's Fair, and so forth. Occasionally, state collectors will go after a specific advertiser and look for it. And one very interesting feature is that there are current news headlines that are on these cards, and I'll show you some examples as we go along. Here's one that says war, and there's a newspaper extra and man shouting, and it's very important. So this is when World War I opened up. So this was a local news advertisement that they used to mail 1 cent advertising for children's clothes of all things. So it says, here's an extra invitation for you to get in touch with our superb collection of men's, young, and boys' clothing for fall and winter. So to use that headline, basically the receiver of this ad would open it up and say, what's going on in here? And boom, he sees what's going on and finds out it's basically an ad. So there are different styles of these cards, and we're going to hit on their styles real quickly. There are regular size cards with either a hidden pouch or bifold. There are letter-like cards with perforated end tabs. There are bi and trifold cards, die-cut cards, long and oversized cards, mechanicals, single cards with blank back, trade cards, and even lookalikes. And I'll go through some of the topics as we go along. So here are regular size postcards, and these can be filed by dealers usually in the novelty section, although they weren't necessarily novelties targeting postcard collectors. They were simply ad matter trying to get the customers to open up the mail and read the ad. But because they're normal size cards, they're fileable in the regular boxes. The other size cards are bigger, and they usually are in albums or in bigger boxes. But here's an example of one with a pair of trousers, a farmer looking out away, and then in this back, there's a opening that has an ad stuck in it. This lady with umbrella shows an ad coming out of her petticoat. This boy shows an ad sitting here in the front of the card with the string pull. So you pull the string out, and there's a folded piece of paper, and you open it up and you read the ad. This particular card is a bifold card, which has an ad printed on the inside. And you can see it has a treasure chest, Captain Kidd, and the text on the picture on the back was a barrel of gunpowder and cannonballs. One of the most frequent cards you'll see is this donkey with the basket. And this particular card was mailed with the printed matter rate, 1 cent, and inside the ad, it showed actually a pictorial of Young's hats. And this business, Young's Brothers Hats, was located in a hotel in Niagara Falls. And here's the Gluck building in Niagara Falls, which was a hotel. And on that same site, there were 2 other hotels or 3 other hotels that had burned. But this was the Gluck building, and inside there was the hat company. So a collector of Niagara Falls might want to see a card like this because it fills in the gap historically of what was on the site of this hotel. Here's an example that shows Livermore Night Company advertising their wares for novelties, and they give the pricing of the cards. So it shows 500 for $10, 1,000 for $15, and each additional 1,000, $12. So it's modest amount of money. So they're like I say, their main focus was not these cards creating their cash flow. It was basically the bigger contracts. But they had this strong niche market that they filled. And I think the lithographer Richard Knight, was the one who did most of these cards, not the engraver Livermore. Here's the letter style cards, and these are quite interesting in terms of how they're constructed. This is very early style, and that here's a stamp collar around a postage stamp, canceled in 1892, it looks like, and then there's a perforated tab on the side, and you would rip that tab off to open the card up to read the ad. And they're selling diamonds. So the person who advertised this card paid a little more for this particular one. And it was a diamond company, so he wanted to come across with good quality. Here's another card, the same thing, tab on the side, and on the back shows a porcupine. Here's another one, basically the same card number as this, talking about building bridges. This is a especially interesting card, in my opinion. It's an 1896 May card, and it's advertised, and it starts off with cathode rays. So in November of 1895, Wilhelm Röntgen discovered X-rays, and it hit the press around February of 1896 in the US after he wrote his paper and got it published. So this was big time news where you could take an X-ray and see somebody's internals, the bones, viscera, and so forth. And so they actually started the concept of using cathode rays to see the inside of this organ. It says, by means of the cathode rays, we are enabled to examine the wonderful organisms of the human system, but not enabled to discover the vital force. Cathode rays can be applied to the needle, piano, and organs. We would be enabled to discover the most wonderful organism and be surprised at its simplicity. So they're using this in order to get the information across on the rays. But this is a quite interesting card, at least in the medical field. Give you a quick rundown. Röntgen right here was a German, and he was studying cathode rays coming out of a Crookes tube. And basically, a lot of the scientists would hook up these Crookes tubes with high voltage electricity. And the cathode would radiate these particles, and some of these tubes had an object in it as a target to create a shadow, others did not. And so the scientists were doing this to try to discover what these particles were. They had no idea they were electrons, high-speed electrons. And so what Röntgen did one day in his lab, he was measuring the strength of the electrons 1 centimeter from the tube. After that, they faded off. But what he found out was he covered the entire tube with cardboard and then discharged the tube, and he had a little pinpoint open here. What happened was there was a fluorescent screen 6 feet away on a shelf that started to fluoresce up very, very brightly. He turned it off, turned the tube off, the screen stopped. He turned the tube on again, screen fluoresced. He stuck his hand in front of the screen and the tube, and sure enough, he saw the bones of his hands. So right away, he knew there was a new ray being produced, an X-ray. And this is an X-ray of his wife's hand. So he made this discovery November 8th. He got very paranoid, thinking, if I discovered this by accident, surely someone else will. So he quickly wrote his paper and he submitted it and got accepted December 28th, 95. So when it hit the news, all the newspapers and everything ran with it big time. And what happened was it ended up as the first medical X-ray in the United States was February 1896. Medical X-rays were done previously in Europe and Germany prior to that. But it was front page news in the US in January of 86. So this guy, Eddie McCarthy, this guy right here, was ice skating and he fell down and broke his wrist. So they put it in a wrap like they always did. And this guy, the doctor, whose brother-in-law was at Dartmouth and who ran the Crookes tube lab, he went to him and he said, hey, do you have a tube that produces X-rays? So this guy had, I think he had 12 tubes and only one of them produced an X-ray. So he hooked it up, did a 12-minute exposure, and then he saw the fracture, and the rest is history. Livermore Knight also got into the electrical war that was going on. The American Electrical Works of 1897 ran an ad advertising wire products to electrical companies. And Livermore Knight made up this Christmas advertising with a folded Christmas tree and a Christmas sled with the words Edison on it and Tesla. And Tesla and Edison were competitors in the electrical market. So Tesla worked with George Westinghouse on AC current projects, alternating current, and Edison was pushing direct current infrastructure. The problem with direct current is you couldn't transmit it long distances. So AC current had many advantages. So when the Niagara Falls Power Plant project of 1893 got going, they used the alternating current of Tesla's and not Edison's. So that last card is quite interesting. It starts out as a Christmas card, but yet it focuses on a very important historical event. Livermore Knight also made bifold cards with printed ads. And this particular ad is talking about the Livermore Knight system of circular advertising, where they basically said, here's what our system is. We have a catchy title on front, the text matches the title, and then we get the customer to read the ad. And most of the time, the ad was written by Livermore and Knight themselves. The customer would come with an idea, Livermore and Knight would create the text, and the rest would be history, and they would mail them out. Here's one on clowns. You can see that on the reverse, there's usually a picture too. Since it's on the left-hand side, it's after 1903. It's after 1903. There are trifold cards with printed ads. This is a very early card. It has an 1890 stamp canceled on it. And you can see it's a trifold. And you flip it around, there's a printed ad on the other side. Here's one from the Gorham Silver Company, which is a trifold, which has talking about square on the head, and they talk about this construction type of thing, and they somehow weave a story about Gorham Silver using a hammer and all this kind of stuff. Here's one with a boy giving a message to his boss. Here's a trifold card on Marconi. So Marconi develops the radio around the turn of the century. And then here's a wireless message. This is a 1917 card, a wireless message advertising a ship cruise. And they're using the Marconi's wireless as a come along to get the people to open it up. So Marconi and various researchers were investigating radio waves for years. And Marconi apparently went to England to get his patent in June 1896. And he was able to figure out how to match the wavelength of the wave that was being produced with the receiving end, and also work on the antennas to make them sensitive. In 1899, he installed his equipment on the St. Paul and sent a message from the St. Paul to shore. And in 1902, he transmitted across the Atlantic. He got patents protecting his work, and therefore benefited from it. Whereas Roentgen never got a patent on his X-ray discovery. He left it open to any scientist who wanted to use it. Die cuts are present for Livermore Knight, and this particular one is a corn with, and inside there's an ad talking about flour mill and cornmeal and so forth. So it's an ad that goes along with the theme of the card. Here's a very large card. You can see by the size of the stamp, you can estimate the size of the card. And it's a card on Georgia peaches. And Rumpf and Moore from Marshallville, Georgia, were the ones who developed the famous Georgia peach. Very, very tasty peach, which was slightly firm so that it could be packed well and shipped without damage. Open the card up, you can see a pack of peaches all inside there. And here's a picture of Rumpf, and this is his wife Moore, and her father was the Moore and Rumpf who worked on the genetics of the initial peach that they patented and soon sold big time. But this particular card was made by somebody in Providence, Rhode Island, and he had gotten cases of these peaches, and he wanted to sell them to the public. and he made up this very large mailer and he mailed it to key clients. So the question is, how many of these did he make up, and what percent were saved? This is the only one that I've ever seen. It's a very large card. Here's a trifold die cut flap on the card, and it's using the baseball theme. So the die cut is this cloud of dust that this base runner is making as he slides into home plate. But they start off with the baseball theme and the word safe. So they tie that word safe in to their ad. And their ad is talking about advertising wholesale the hub couch. And they say that it's a safe investment for the retailer to sell many of these and make a profit. And this particular card had a return card in it. And you can actually see the picture of the kids on the back and the baseball theme on front. This is a pretty expensive card. It's because it's a baseball theme. But it's interesting how they use the word safe, and they're talking about beds. Other partial die cuts, here it is, think it over. Person going through the literature. Here's the one on the level. And so here we have a worker leveling a brick wall with his trowel and his level, and we have kids doing seesaw on the trowel. So on the level. So again, these same cards exist with different ads inside them. So I always try to take a look to see if the one ad is much better than the other. There's long and oversized cards, particularly the Spanish-American War played a role in getting some of these cards out. So here's a card right after the Spanish-American War showing a artillery shell with a wing, and the new island possessions, and one are the Latrones, which are the Marianas. So this is the front of the card, which was mailed, the back of the card. Inside, one panel talks about our new possessions, which a lot of the customers would want to know about. What's going on? And then they talk about let the eagle scream. The war is over, peace has come. Let's get back to business and enjoy life. It's a stationery store talking about stains and other black equipment and so forth. I'm trying cements. Yeah, cements on that. But I remember when the Gulf War came out in the late 90s, I didn't know much about the geography of the Middle East. And, all of a sudden maps came out, and I bought one because I didn't understand it or didn't really pay attention to it. There was no reason to. And probably the same thing held true for the people of this day around 1898 when these came out. Another one with a Spanish-American War theme, it mailed in 1898, shows a map of Cuba on the back with all the major cities and ports and so forth. And inside this particular ad, they talked about heater ducts and heater equipment. It's very unusual to see a card that's Spanish-American War that's advertising heater ducts, but they did it and they pulled it off. Here's another one showing the gold rush of 1896 to 1899. And they talk about gold, and of course the product is gem-like, and it could be any product. They could switch the text to meet any product you wanted. Very good card. These are long cards. You can see, I don't know, about 8.25 inches, and you can see that by the type of the card. And this stamp is an 1897 cancel on it. Here's a Uncle Sam card that there's the tab that opens up, and this face has a slot that has a tab like that, and then there's the other part. So there's a slit here under the hat that this face goes in. So when you pull this one out and flip it open, his cigar changes location, and he starts winking his left eye. So it changes in the same card. And here's the back of it, and then you can see it's the diagram is over the stamp box, so that's pre-1904. What a way to advertise a product. In this era, 1910, about 8% of the population owned telephones. So the real question was, how do you get someone to think that they need to buy a telephone who's never had one and who's gotten by life all along without one? Well, Livermore Knight came up with a couple of ideas here. You can see that accidents will happen. Minutes, yes, seconds may save a life. So the implication is when something happens, when you call for help, somebody's going to be on the other end who's going to come and show up and help. Same thing with medical issues. Here we have a picture of a nurse caring for a patient, and perhaps the nurse is reporting into the doctor to report signs and symptoms, or perhaps asking for instructions as to what to do next. And so the whole idea is, here's a doctor on the way to the patient's house, but here's a nurse already there in communication with the doctor. So a very clever way to advertise people's needs for telephones. There are mechanical cards out there. This is a pretty simple one from 1893, I think, maybe 94, where you simply pull it out by a string. The string is hanging on, and on the other side, it has the ad where you can read. Here's a mill, and the water wheel actually is on a spindle, a metal spindle and the wheel spins. And it's a bifold card that you open up and read the message. Here's a neat card. It has a grinder sharpening an axe. It has a hole punched for hanging it on the wall. And it also has a piece of sandpaper, stiff sandpaper, used as the wheel, and it does spin. And it has its own ads. And I've got 2 or 3 of these with different ads on the back from different states. This is one of my favorites, most intricate. It's by the Edward Darby and Sons company. And this guy, Darby, he made steel mesh. And he needed a way to sell it, and he was trying to make mesh lockers. And so Livermore Knight came up with this idea about padlock and key. So you open up the card, and this opens up. You close it, and the slot goes over the hasp area, and the lock actually slides in, and you can close this lock. And there's a little notch on that. So this is a very, very complex card. I've seen 2 of these. I own one. I've seen another one, and they're pretty pricey. So here's the back of the card showing, the lock, the padlock with the money and so forth. But I went online looking up Pendar lockers, and sure enough, there was a metal Pendar locker on eBay for sale and waiting for bids. And here's, there's a tag on it up top here, and here's what the tag says, Edward Darby and Sons Company. So this is what he sold as mesh. So he really made mesh, but he made these lockers as a way of capitalizing on that product. Wonderful card. It's very, very, very rare, and probably one of the most intricate that I've ever seen. Here's a neat one that taught me something. I didn't know who Huerta was. And this is circa 1914, and it says, "Down with Huerta." Well, the way this card works is that it shows some military operations in the sea, airplane and so forth. It says, "Down with Huerta." Well, if you open the card, there's a swivel here with an American flag. When the flag is up, Huerta is down. When you push the flag down, Huerta is up. So basically, it's about Huerta trying to take over Mexico, and they didn't like that. So basically, Huerta was a Mexican military officer and became president of Mexico by coup. And he was in office from February 13 through July 14. And it was backed by Germany. Taft allowed it, but Wilson did not, and he decided to help the rebels with arms, and they finally overtook Huerta, who fled to Spain. When Huerta finally came back, trying to get into power again with German aid, he was arrested by the U.S. and he passed away in prison in 1916. But the card is a reminder of news headlines and political aspects that are going on. And I forget what he was advertising, but it may have no connection whatsoever with the military, but somehow they weave it in. They produced single cards, the same size as postcards, and but they had some add-ons. So this was a glued-on sign. There was a glued-on door that could open up, and there was a glued-on hands. And on the back, they have copyrighted by Livermore and Knight, Providence, Rhode Island, and this particular card is numbered 777. These were probably given out as courtesies by companies who had an event for their employees, and they either gave them out with a gift or just gave them out as a nicety and so forth. I've never seen one of these mailed. They don't have a stamp box, so they're not meant to be mailed. Whereas the other ones have stamp box. And remember, none of these have the word postcard on the back. As in all areas of this era, you're going to have stereotypes of all types. And this is an example of Livermore Night. They weren't overly obsessed with stereotypes, but they are out there. Here's one of a Filipino, and he's walking with sandwich boards, and you lift up the sandwich board and pull out the note and read it, and you've got an ad there. Here's one of Hop Sing and laundry in the back, and he's advertising. So his ad is up his sleeve, and you pull the piece out and you read it and so forth. Here's a very large card. I think this card is about 9 inches long, and it's a spin-off of the other farmer card you saw. And here's the ad in the back, and you open that ad up and you read what's going on. But on the back of this card, near the stamp, is this particular person here. Here, the farmer is surveying his fields. And this particular one, the old farmer is surveying the young lady, and that's a type stereotype. So he's out looking at the field, trying to see what's out there. And this is the black stereotype. And the lady is saying to the man over the fence, "Have you seen my rooster?" And the man goes, "No, I ain't seen no rooster." And of course, under his coat, there are some feathers hanging out, and there's a piece of paper tagged to it. Pull the feathers, open the message up, read it. Talks about selling lumber or cigars or something along those lines, sometimes alcohol. So those kinds of products, I guess the clientele thought this kind of a cute card would do the trick. This is a large card also. This is not a regular size card. It's probably 7¼ inches long. And this is not a rare card. I've seen many of those examples. Other stereotypes would be, kids across the railroad tracks, the yellow kid. And this particular one is advertising the 5th annual tournament of the bicycle organizations, the 2 of them in 1897. And during this era, bicycling was fading out around 1897. Around this time, no, excuse me, 1897, it was peaked. Around 1905, it started to fade out because of auto racing. So at this stage, it was a big event. You can see from this picture how many people were at this event. This is a very expensive card. I think this is the most expensive Livermore Night card out there. I've seen 3 of them. Livermore Night trade cards exist. These are engraved cards by Livermore, and they are dated. Yeah, this is 1884. So they went in business in 1883. So this was while they were in business. And here's a card, which is a trade card with a coin type product in it, and they're advertising shoes. I've seen this same card, something similar as a mailed card also, which was put together differently, and it had a stamp box on it. But these are tough cards also to try to complete the picture. Now, there are lookalikes for Livermore Night, particularly foreign cards. Here's one from the Netherlands. Here's a South African card, and it has the national anthem inside there for them. German card, and here's another German card. Again, with a message in the back. All of them have message in the back. Couple of things about the messages. Don't buy a Livermore Night card that is supposed to have a message that is missing it, unless you just want it as an example, but pay less for it. Number two, on one occasion, I have pulled out one of the messages and looked at it, and it didn't look original. Somehow the paper didn't look right, the printing didn't look right, and I was afraid that it was, copied or something like that. So I didn't keep it and didn't buy it. So keep an eye out. This particular one I bought because I didn't have this Dutch example, so I bought it even though there was no message in the pants. Henderson litho can be confused with Livermore Night. They're very attractive cards. They came out, started around 1904, and then for about a year, they did the longer cards, and then they went back to the smaller cards. But most of them will have Circle H and a number written on them. This particular card was designed by Nash, who was the artist who designed the picture. It's not the name of the publisher. Circle H is Henderson Litho. They're the publisher, and they numbered their cards also. And I've seen numbers up to 680s for them. But the large cards, which are really interesting, tend to be in the 100 to 200 number range. And they sell for about 1/4 the cost of a Livermore Night card. But I've seen these advertised as Livermore Nights. They certainly look like them because they're very catchy, but when you get into the detail, they're not. Circle H. Another set of cards that can be confused with them is Sheldon Press, which are trifolds, and they have a triangle B on there, and their cards are numbered. And these are Sheldon Press trifolds. And again, like I said, starting out on eBay, there's a set of cards that has one Livermore Night, two Henderson Litho, and one Sheldon Press. And they're very good cards, all of them, but they're advertised all as Livermore Nights. People just didn't know. I mean, they're misrepresenting it because they don't know. So in conclusion, the Livermore Night Company was in business from 1883 to 1985, although they really stopped printing in 1971 and became a holding company after that. I'm trying to put together a list of all the cards made. I don't know that there's 1,200 fully numbered cards that have made. I'm guessing 400 to 450, but that's just a guess. I find them very interesting, and I just hope to find new ones. And if you've seen some of these or other different ones, let me know by email if you can.
Wow, thanks, Bob. That was just terrific. It just goes to show you, we go through albums and we go through postcard books, but also look at that box they may have. Maybe a shirt came in at Christmas time and it's larger box, but it may have some of these interesting to some of us, postcards that are larger that don't fit in, but they're such fun and such a piece of Americana. And but Bob even shows how some were actually used in other countries too. But just terrific. But thank you so much, Bob.
One of the things about these cards is because they don't have the word postcard on the back, and because they are oversized, there's not a mainstream following. Because people say, well, what do I do with it? It's one card out of my others. My others are in an album. But once you get hooked on a theme, they're fun to look for, and you'll find more than you think.
That's true. That's true. Knowledge is power, and here we've
Yeah,
given a powerful presentation for sure. We're just that much smarter than everyone else who couldn't be with us today.
yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. The topic
Sure.
is so interesting. I'm wondering if there has been any publication about these or this type of card, because it seems like a natural for a book about history of advertising, history of postcards, history of design in America, et cetera, et cetera. mechanical folding things. I mean, it's just such a wonderful thing. Has anybody published anything that is a resource and for pictures?
Not yet. I mean, I'm trying to do that, and I'm getting more serious as we go along because I've got the cards and I've got the pictures, and it's just a matter of figuring out how to go about it. Because you run into the issue of do you show the card front? Do you show the card back? Do you show it open? So you have all these parameters that make it cumbersome to figure it out. But yes, I think I know of several people I've heard through the grapevine that want to do a book on Livermore Night, but I don't know who's got the cards. I've got probably 300 of them. So I figured, and I've got pictures of them too. I bought it 10 years ago at a major stamp show in DC. Oh no, where was it? Chicago. I met a dealer who had Livermore Night cards. He had 400 of them, and I paid his son a certain amount of money to take JPEG pictures of all those cards. So I got the JPEGs, and then of course I've got cards of my own. But you know how it is, the JPEGs, sometimes they come out great, sometimes not. So I've got the data, it's just a matter of whether it's going to find a home in a book or not.
Hmm.
Hopefully it will.
Okay, Hal, we've got one comment from George Eberhardt who wants to know, are there any Livermore cards that depict airships of any sort?
Airships, like aircraft carriers?
Well, it says airships, but
Oh, no. You're talking about blimps or
Balloon.
air.
Right.
Not that I've seen that I know of. Oh, yes, there is one. Yeah, there's a long one. Yeah, and yeah, there is at least one, maybe two.
Cool.
Probably around turn of the century, maybe before 1910.
Neat.
Okay, new comment from Pat Holloway. I noticed on one of the early slides a card depicting a bicycle cyclometer.
Yes.
I don't know, sure what a cyclometer is. Do you know how many bicycles or clock-related Livermore cards there are?
I think there's four I know of. There may be more. They're advertising the events, the meets, and that cyclometer card. That's a good card. I think that's a RPM card or something, or some sort of mileage. I forget how you work that thing, but it's a fancy instrument. But there's probably 4 or 5 that come to mind right now. But there's all sorts of topics, and the problem is the state people want, I don't blame them. They want a nice vintage view of a street or a building or whatever. Not necessarily a printed ad from from a company, but getting a printed ad from a company sometimes is quite interesting, particularly if you're searching, regular card views in that area, like the Niagara Falls card I showed you.
One quick one, and that was you refer, Bob, to this was expensive, or this was more expensive, or this was really expensive. What is the price range on these things?
They've come down. I think about a year ago, a guy was selling out on eBay his cards, his Livermore Night cards. He probably had about 20 of them. I was getting a few that I wanted for $40 a piece. The ones that I really wanted went for 200 a piece.
Wow.
I got the picture, but I didn't want to pay that much. Maybe I should have bought them. I don't know. When I first got into it, they were about $100, 75 to 150 a piece. And of course, like anything else, things have come down. So they're not quite as expensive, but usually 20, like the donkey card with the basket. That's usually a $20 to $25 card if it's clean and has the ad in. The cathode ray card, that's a $150 card. That's a toughie.
Hmm.
So
Interesting.
anyway,
Thanks.
that's the current market as I know it.
Thank you.
So
Okay,
Bob, when
anything
you
else?
when you do find them at a show, how are they typically classified? Like what box would they be in, or where would we look for them?
The way I found a few at York a year and a half ago. Gorham had them. He had a table with large size cards all laid out on a black tabletop. And then he had his expensive, real photos and so forth in a box nearby. So they were just laying out for in full view. And by a day and a half, they were all gone. I bought several and so forth, but they were usually gone. So people who know what they have display them in that fashion, and they usually sell pretty quick. Somebody like Susan keeps them in folders, like a binder. And occasionally you'll pick them up in novelties in the regular size box. And
Right.
then of course they're in stamp auctions. Occasionally sometimes they're described, sometimes they're not. And the harder part is for me, when I see a card pictured for eBay, I want to see the Livermore Night number, because I want to know, do I have that number? Because I have my cards listed by number. I have folders, numbers 1 to 100 and up to 1200. And a lot of vendors don't do that. I'd say half of them do, half don't. But again, it's the early cards that caught my attention, the pre 1898 cards, because they just have an aura about them, in my opinion. The early stamps, their usage, they were paving the way for usage of advertising in that manner. I haven't seen any from Canada that I know of. I've seen 4 or 5 from London, England, with constables and English type characters on them. So they had customers in England who used their cards, and they catered to that market.
Cool. I bet there are some from Canada, though.
They might be. It could be
Yeah.
I just overlooked them.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't get those fancy advertising cards very often, but I've seen the style, but I don't think I've ever seen the name.
Yeah. If you see the name, like I say, it's like a name brand purse or sport coat or something. It has a little bit of a click to it. But most of them are numbered, but many are not. But the name is usually on there.
Okay, very good. Bob's a Wichita Postcard Club member, and you could contact us at any time to get in touch with him. We would be happy to help you make that connection.
Well, I hate to be a pig in the scene, but nobody's asking. I am curious, with those sort of printing skills and the ability to fold and design, did they produce other things that are available? I mean, I think of trade cards or
Oh,
any
yes.
other kind of
Trade cards
folding
for sure.
novelties.
Calendars. How many of you have seen these historical books by the insurance companies? These little booklets that talk about the presidents and the history of the U.S. Livermore Knight printed those things. They were by the thousands. But usually, and their name is usually on most of their products, particularly even the trade cards.
Did they design their own equipment and manufacture and make it? I mean, it's a lot of these things are such custom jobs.
Yes, I mean, who wants it? First off, you take a card, you got to print you got to get the design, you got to print up the blue jeans for the farmer, then you got to print up the card, then you got to print up the advertising thing. You've got to fold it, by nines. Then you have to glue the thing together, slip the thing inside there, and then sometimes if you paid extra as a customer, they would mail it for you and address the cards. So they sold cards that were cheap, but they also sold expensive cards. You know, like that cyclometer, that bicycle cyclometer card, that wasn't a cheap card in its day. I bet you it was expensive to make and mail.
So a lot of this was handwork then.
Oh yeah, it had to have been.
Good God.
Unless I'm wrong, I don't know how they would do it otherwise. Yeah. And when I first saw them, then, you know, I thought, another novelty, who cares? You know, I move on. But then the more you look into it, you go, what? There's no postcard written on the back. And this is 1892. What's going on? Why is this thing, you know, what's going on with this history of this thing, you know?
And there's some that got fairly complex.
Yeah.
Just intricate little bits, you know.
Oh, yeah. And sometimes I will see on the internet a Livermore night card being sold by booksellers. And they put hefty prices on them. They're I think they're probably 50% overpriced, but they're good looking cards. They're clean cards and they have all the accoutrements that they're supposed to have.
I'm so pleased to know about that fact that they weren't labeled as postcards to fit into
Oh yeah.
a penny postage stamp. So
Well, the printed matter rate by the Postal Service basically said 1 ounce per 1 cent per 2 ounces. And it went from when was it? 1873 to 1925. So 1 cent for 2 ounces. So he could make all these cards. All he had to do was make sure when he weighed it, it was less than 2 ounces,
yeah,
that it could be mailed for 1 cent. But as
Cool.
soon as you put the words postcard on the back, it has to conform to the post office's definition of a postcard. Has a size, has a thickness, has a weight, and it has to have printing on the back that says address only here, blah, 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 blah.
yeah, yeah.
Very
Cool.
complex.
So wonderful, so wonderful. Well, it's the real Cadillac or the BMW of
I don't know.
postcards. I don't know. I think it's just terrific and
They're cool. I like
so
them.
colorful and
Yeah.
just the design is knock yourself out.
Oh,
Good.
yeah.
Well, we do thank you for being here.